Welcome to this Bible study series on Genesis 1 and in particularly the creation week. I want to do this second Bible study series before we continue in Genesis 1 because it explains a life extinction event or a semi-life extinction event. Now these events happens on the earth on a regular basis. If you talk about hundreds of thousands of years, these events have been happening and it will again happen in the future. And your Bible actually describes such an event. And the people didn't understand it initially because it seems strange that it will talk about a disaster in the sea and ships being destroyed, and then he talks about a disaster on land and harvest being destroyed, and then he talks about rivers being destroyed. And how can one asteroid destroy around the world? How can there be a catastrophic event around the world with one asteroid? But then because that's what Revelation 8 explains. Now I just wanted to do this so that we can understand what happened before Genesis 1. How come the earth was empty and void? How come it happened that way? So I want us to look at the Bible and see how the Bible describes such an event. Now the one in the Bible was not a full life extinction event, so you get also semi-life extinction event where a large percentage of life on earth is destroyed. So let's just look at that as a prelude to explaining the creation week or the renewal. As the Psalm 104 says, it's a renewal of the surface of the earth that is explained for us in Genesis 1 in the creation week. So let's just look at that and understand why the earth sometimes become void and empty and there's darkness on the surface of the earth. Let's look at Revelation 8. In Revelation 8 we will concentrate only on this chapter today, so we don't have to page around. We're just going to look at Revelation 8. And it says here in verse 8, chapter 8 verse 1, it says, when he opened, and this is the seventh seal, that the angel opens, and God allows that because mankind have formulated ways and ideas and thinking that, and some governments like it, that you wouldn't have any Christianity because many governments doesn't want to answer to Christianity. But we all have to one day answer to God's word. But let's look at Revelation 8 and verse 1. It says, when he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. Now that's a silence because of the horror of what's going to happen. And verse 2 says, and I saw the seven angels who stand before God, and to them were given seven trumpets. And another angel having a golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. So these are prayers for protection, and it is offered to God before the disaster happens so that saints can be protected. And verse 4 it says, and the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God from the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar and threw it to the earth. And there were noises, thundering, lightnings, and earthquake. So the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. And the first angel sounded, and hail and fire followed. So this is hail and fire. So they are rocks that seems to be on fire coming out of heaven, falling onto the earth. And a third of the trees were burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. So it seems like rocks on fire that comes from heaven that falls all over the earth, and it affected a third of the earth's surface. And then a second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain now, a solid piece of rock, a big boulder, a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. So now it's a second part that gets thrown into the sea. I don't know if you've seen the movie Deep Impact. That's more or less precisely what is happening here. So a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood. So becoming blood means it became poisonous. You cannot drink it, the fish cannot live off it. And it says, and a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. Now how are the ships destroyed? Well, a third of the ships are normally at anchor in the harbor, and when a tsunami strikes them and pushes them up into the land, they becomes impossible to bring them back to the sea. So they are by default destroyed. Verse 10 says, and a third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven. So here's another piece of burning rock. A great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers. So it came down, and in the atmosphere, with the friction, it probably exploded and spread out over a third of the rivers of the earth, and on the springs of the water. And it says, verse 11, the name of the star is wormwood. A third of the water became wormwood, and many men died from the water because it was made bitter. So the material of this section of the comet was poisonous, and how it reacted with the atmosphere when it crashes into our atmosphere. When all that dust and things come into rivers, it became poisonous. And verse 12 says, then the fourth angel sounded, and a third of the sun was struck. So now you can't see the sun. There's so much dust and debris in the atmosphere. So a third of the sun and the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them were darkened. So if you're on the earth and you look up, it became very dark. A third of the earth became dark, and that debris spread worldwide. So eventually it was a dark couple of days and months on the earth. And I look, and I heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the remaining blast of the trumpet and of the 3 angels which are about to sound. So we had 4 angels, and now there's another 3 angels. Now their sound is the after effect of what will happen on the earth with mankind and nations because of this semi-life extinction event that will happen in future. Now if you read Revelation 9, remember that the Apostle John, who was given this vision when he was imprisoned on the Isle of Patmos, he described things he saw, and he would not have known what a helicopter is, with missiles in its tail and biochemical weapons, because mankind and nations would begin to fight each other for food, and they had to be subdued through chemical weapons to prevent a war, a worldwide war, to totally break out and annihilate mankind. So that's what you read in Revelation 9. But I just want to look at Revelation 8 and see the catastrophic event. Now, previously, people said that's strange, there's some disaster on land, then there's a disaster in the sea, then there's a disaster on the rivers, and again a fourth disaster all over the earth. Sorry. So how can that be? How can one rock cause a disaster all over the earth? Quite recently, NASA put up the Hubble telescope, and NASA's Hubble telescope initially they found were wrong. The focus was out, so they had to send up the space shuttle and replace part. And it was just in time, because then two people, Schumacher and Levy, discovered that there's a meteor heading for Jupiter, and the Hubble telescope was fixed just in time for NASA to aim it at Jupiter to see what was going to happen when this meteor struck Jupiter. And what they saw was that the meteor was separating into 9 pieces. And eventually there were 9 pieces that were heading into Jupiter, one after the other. And then they understood that what you have with a meteor is that there are big boulders, and there are smaller rocks, and there's sand. It's all compacted together in ice. It's not water ice, but carbon dioxide ice, or some ice that doesn't change from solid to liquid like water, but it changes from solid to vapor. And the weak gravity of this meteor is such that the solar wind can drag the gas away. But anyway, as this meteor comes towards the sun from far out, the gas ice vaporized, and that loosens the rocks and the boulders. And when this whole loose lot are now dragged towards the planet, in this case Jupiter, but also when it would have been dragged towards the Earth, the nearest boulder would be dragged first, because it will have a bit of a bigger gravity pulling at it. And as it pulls away from this mass, the next one would be pulled away, and eventually you have a whole long string of boulders that's going to slam into this planet one after the other. Now the planet rotates around its axis like the Earth do, and so one after each other, every piece would smack into the planet. And this is what would happen to the Earth, and what you read in Revelation 8. And it's interesting, maybe just coincident that Revelation 9 explains what is the aftermath and what mankind will do to each other to survive after this catastrophic event. It's also Revelation 9, so it's almost like it's a foreboding event to show mankind, if we don't repent and begin to take God serious, and learn from Him, because God seeks us to be sons and daughters of God. He wants us to learn from Him, but if we have believed things to say there is no God, and we ignore His word completely, then God says, you are now increasing crime, you're making life hell for many people, and God says, I'm going to step aside and allow these disasters to happen because you turn your back to me. But if they are saints, they will be protected. As in Lot's case, when God protected Lot out of Sodom and Gomorrah. So this is how such a disaster happens. So we've seen it in Jupiter. Now we can read Revelation 8 and understand, oh, okay, it's a meteor that's going to have all the gas de-iced by the sun as it comes in, and the pieces will then separate and it will smack the earth one after each other. First a lot of sand or small rocks comes down and it looks like hail fire, because there are thousands of pieces that comes down in an area. Then a big piece will hit this as after the earth rotates a bit. A next big piece will hit the sea and it will cause a tsunami that's going to destroy ships at harbor. And then another piece will explode and the debris, poisonous now, will spread out over rivers. And suddenly there won't be enough food for the world and there'll be wars or attempted wars. But that's when helicopters probably, I think what the Apostle John saw, coming out of silos and things to go and subdue mankind with chemicals, not to kill each other and cause a total World War III disaster where everything is destroyed. But it describes very well that typical situation that mankind will face at one stage. So if you can imagine that, but on a bigger scale, big enough to wipe out life on the surface of the earth, so that God would have to come and intervene and start a balanced ecosystem again from scratch. What we saw and what we will see in Genesis 1 is the earth was empty and void and it was dark, just like would happen here and what was described here. And then God intervened, and as per Psalm, I think 104 says verse 30, that He will then, or He did renew the surface of the earth. Now when He says that, obviously doesn't mean life at 1,000 or 10,000 feet below the sea level. That life continues unabated. There's life there that doesn't even need sun to carry on. But in some areas in the world, the sea will be poisoned, but some life survives in the depth of the sea. But on the surface, nothing survived before. And what we look at is disasters of the earth and what probably happened before Genesis 1, and we will now carry on to Genesis 1 in the next video, and then show you how it exactly explains how God would renew the surface of the earth to establish a balanced ecosystem. Because you see, you can't make antelope without there being grass. You can't have lions without antelopes. You can't have big animals like elephants without the fruit that they would eat. And also you can't have tree with fruit without the birds that will eat the fruit and have spread the seed. So it would need to be an intervention from God in Genesis 1 to restart the balanced ecosystem of the earth after a major catastrophic life extinction event. So I just wanted to look at that and want you to face that and have that in mind when we read Genesis 1, because then it will begin to make sense to you, and you can see that it is a scientific correct explanation, but only if you believe and understand there is a God in heaven that can intervene when He needs to. And He normally would intervene in our lives on a regular basis if we worship Him, if we believe Him. But if we don't, and you have cities which have turned their back on God completely, and you have false religions in many places, and Christian pastors and evangelists are killed in certain cities and towns and countries. So God then walks away from that. And Jesus, like Jesus Christ, when He preached in the city and they didn't listen, not one would listen to Him, He would shake the dust off His feet and walk on. And that city was destined to be destroyed by the Roman Empire. But so also will happen in the future and has happened in the past. So I want you to just understand that, and in the next video we will go through Genesis 1 and the creation week, and then you will much better understand if you look carefully at the words being used there. So I look forward to Genesis 1. I look forward to explaining it to you, because you can then see it is exactly true. And it has to be exactly true, and it explains how it was possible. So we'll see you in the next video. Thank you for listening.